okay. I do think that people are still jumping on to the webinar as we're talking, so hopefully we'll still get more people that are connecting. But do let us know as if anything arises that you are having any issues with hearing us or seeing the screen. Just shoot us a question. We're not going to use the chat function today. Definitely just the area of your screen that's allowing you to type in a question is what we'd prefer that to use today. So since there's two of us, you might have one of us responding to some of your questions. We may choose a few of them to go over. If they're not questions that are for everyone, we may address it individually with you, but we will try to address questions that are good examples to show everyone, especially when we get to that end of the webinar where we're going to just focus on your questions. That's when we really want to know what you want to have us show you that we haven't gone over already. So if there's nothing right now that you want to have us talk about, then I am going to switch this over to let David talk. And actually, David, we can use my screen if you want to. I'm not going to change the presenter yet. If you want to talk about this slide, go right ahead. They can hear you.
Okay. Thanks, Amanda. So this is David. I am a data analyst with All Chicago. And right here we have the assessment timeline. So we've already gone through the first submission. So that occurred on Monday, and then I sent out the results today, so everybody knows whether or not they were compliant. And then next week, next Monday, there's going to be the deadline for the second submission. So that's on Monday, and then by Thursday, I will have sent out the results from that, so everybody knows whether or not they were compliant. Again, I just want to remind you to use the question section, and through each section, we're going to be dealing with different sections. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to ask questions, and we'll go through a few of those, but not all of them, obviously. And then towards the end, we'll try to just get through as many questions as we can.
Great.
All right.
If you're ready, then I'm going to hand over the controls, and we're going to get into these examples. So give us just a second to give ourselves the right permissions, and we'll be off. And give it just a second. Here we go. You should now be seeing the report, and here's David to fill you in.
So the report has 5 tabs right here, and this first one is just a summary. So I know a lot of you guys are actually familiar with the report already. You've seen it a lot, so I'll try to go through this pretty quickly so that we're not repeating a huge amount of information. But this first page right here shows you some aggregate numbers. So this is helpful for understanding, your entire program and what's going on there, but actually isn't particularly helpful as far as fixing data, because it doesn't show you which clients there were problems with. It just shows you that there were a number of clients that were missing. Social Security information and veteran status. So it shows you all these things, which is helpful and important to know, but not helpful as far as correcting the mistakes. The next tab is going to be where we're going to look at that. So this shows on a client level. So for each client, and actually not just a client level, on the entry-exit level, whether or not information was inputted correctly. So you can see for this first client, for this entry-exit, the one that occurred on the 30th of September in 2015, we can see that this piece of data is missing, this one's missing, this one's missing. There was an issue with HUD verification right here, and this one was missing. And this is actually a little bit tricky because, unlike most charts, this one's got sort of it's kind of like double wide. So you can see this one refers to the name. This next one below it, the one that's missing, refers to the head of household. So if we were to check, and we actually will with this client, if we were to check this client's head of household or whether or not they responded to the head of household question, we're going to see that they did not, and we're going to go through how to fix that. And each one of these sets of 2 rows refers to one client at one entry exit. So we've got these 2 rows right here, these right here, these right here, and it goes down this way. And you can see actually with this particular provider, this is our test provider that I ran with, the All Chicago Emergency Shelter. You can see that there is a lot of missing data and a lot of HUD verification issues. So hopefully your reports don't look like this. There is actually one other thing I want to point out in this tab is towards the bottom. there's this dictionary down here that kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. So if there's a red box that says null, that means that this is a value that we require and it is missing. If there's a red box that says mismatch, that means that that's a value that we require and there's something off about it. So typically this is in the income or non-cash benefits field where there are mistakes in the way the data is inputted, and we're going to take a closer look at that later. But just to know, I mean, it's a mismatch. There's one piece of data that says one thing, and there's another piece of data that has contradicting information. The next one down is the HUD verification. If that's in red, that means that you didn't input all the information that was required. So this is typically, again, for income and non-cash benefits, where you're required to enter a number of different lines of data. Then the next two ones, if you've got HUD verification or null in a box with no color, that means that that thing is either missing or there's an error with it, but it is not something that we're looking at for this particular data quality assessment. So you can see right here that there's a null, but it is not in red. And if we scroll up to figure out what that was, this says, total months, and this refers to, and actually this is explained a little bit down here, sorry. Total number of months homeless or on the streets in the past 3 years. So if the client responded that they were never homeless, then that's not a question that they're required to answer. So we're not discounting that, and that's the type of thing that would be a null or a dash that isn't red. It's a piece of data that's missing, but it's not one that's required for that particular entry exit. And this down here tells you which question it's looking for. So you know, a lot of these are abbreviations, and if you're just confused as to what the abbreviation is, then you can look down here at the bottom to tell you what it is. So this NC entry is non-cash benefits entry, and all these things. All right, so now we're going to move on to the next tab for child-only entries, and these next ones are a little bit more clear. So this tab shows all of the clients that are showing up as child-only entries, which are entries into projects for children that don't have any adults attached to them, and in a project where that type of thing would be confusing and unexpected. And Amanda's going to go over this a little bit later, but this is just a list of the clients that are counting as child only. Tab D is about bed utilization. We didn't get a huge amount of questions about this, but the idea here is that it's looking at the clients who are entered in the program at the time that the bed utilization was looked at, which is always the last Wednesday in the first month of the quarter. So this one was the last Wednesday in October. And it was, you know, it's just a list of the people who were entered into the program at that time. And the last tab about timeliness, this is a tab, once again, we didn't have a huge amount of questions about this because this isn't something that we're paying an enormous amount of attention to right now. But this has to do with whether or not data was inputted quickly after the actual thing occurred, so after the entry actually occurred. All right. So I think now I'm just going to go ahead and get into some data here and fixing some of the data. So the first one that I said first off, we're going to go into the assessment detail tab down here, because this is going to tell us on a client level, on an entry-exit level, which clients and which entries are missing data. So I'm going to start with this one, this client 285825, and we see that it's the household designation, or the head of household designation, is missing for that client. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to pull up this client, which is 285825. And there are a couple of entries for this client. And we're gonna, and this probably isn't what you're typically gonna see, but we have to pay really close attention to the entry date for this client. So both these programs are the same. We're looking at the All Chicago Emergency Shelter, but we want the one that entered. We want the entry exit that happened on 9/30/2015. So this is the one that we're gonna be looking at. And you actually have a couple of options for where to fix this data. And one of your options, absolutely 100%, is not this Assessments tab. And we've been running this issue a lot, because if you enter data in this tab right here, it actually doesn't get associated with the entry exit. It only gets associated with the client. So it's not helpful to input data into the Assessments tab because it will not show up correctly on the data quality report. It needs to be entered either by, and this is chugging, either by clicking on the appropriate pencil for the entry exits right here in the entry exit section of your summary, or it can be entered in the entry exits tab by clicking on essentially the same pencils. But you cannot enter it in the Assessments tab. So I'm going to go back to the summary, and I want to pick the entry exit that, or the entry that happened on 9/30/2015. So I'm going to click right here because this is the head of household designation, and I'm going to save and get in right here. And we're going to see that the head of household question is, look at that, data not collected. So we're going to have to find some way to fix that, or if it truly wasn't collected and we don't know, then then that's it, and and that's an issue. But if you know the answer to the question, you got to make sure that you submit it right here, and this is where it's going to be. So this is Bowman Test. Let's say he is the head of household, and then we save. Oh shoot. You can see Service Point is saying it looks like you missed a lot of other pieces of data, but we're not going to focus on those ones right now. So this one is fixed for now. Oh, look at that. So this one is fixed for now, but it will not show up on the report as being fixed until the following day, because that's how long it takes for the data to update in our system. So even though it's fixed, it's completely okay. You don't have to do anything with the head of household information for this particular client and this particular entry. It won't show up correctly in the report until the following day. So that was just sort of a basic missing data one. If you've got missing data, it can be solved in almost the exact same way for anything. But there are some other questions. And one that tends to be very tricky are the mismatches. So I'm going to take a look at, not this one, but this one right here. So we've got this client 306588, and there is a mismatch, and this is a mismatch in the non-cash benefit entry. Right there, yeah, because it's the lower in the M column. So I'm going to take this client ID, and I'm going to head back over to Service Point. And again, this isn't typical, but you see I've got a ton of entries into this program because this is a test client that we continuously use for this purpose. But now I'm looking for the entry that occurred on 9/30. So that is this one right here. And we had a mismatch in the non-cash benefit field. So that's going to be down here. And you can see this mismatch is referring to the fact that this question was answered no. So somebody said that they are not receiving a non-cash benefit from any source. But you can see right here that they in fact are receiving a non-cash benefit, or were receiving a non-cash benefit at the time of entry. And it's actually very important to know when the entry was occurred when you're looking at this data. So we could scroll back up to the top, and you can see that this entry, excuse me, right here, this entry occurred 9/30/2014. So we scroll back down, and all of these non-cash benefits were active as of 9/29. Excuse me, only this one that says yes right here. All these ones that say no, you're required to enter this information for HUD verification, but the client was not receiving benefit from these ones at the time of entry, but they were receiving benefits from this one. And actually, if we go further in, oh, you know what? These actual ones aren't very helpful, but this first one is saying that they were receiving. There's a line of non-cash benefit that they were receiving right here, and they were receiving at a time of income. So that means that either this piece of information right here is incorrect, or this piece of information up here is incorrect. So you would have to look back through your notes and try to figure out which one of these two things is the incorrect information. And let's say, for this case, that they actually were receiving that non-cash benefit. So we're going to go ahead up here and change this one to yes. And we can save and exit. And that's that. And again, this information won't be updated immediately. It'll only update the next day. All right, the last mismatch that I want to talk about is for actually the same client, but for a different entry exit. For the entry exit that occurred on 7/30/2015. So it's this one right here. So I'm going to go into that one. And this one is an income mismatch. So again, really important to look at the entry date for the project, which is 7/30/2015. And so this question, income from any source, was answered as yes. And you can actually see this line of income right here that they were receiving unemployment insurance starting at 7/30. But this is saying that the income started after this date. So the income wasn't active on this date, it started after this date. So the issue here was that this was inputted with the same exact start date as the entry date. So if this person were actually receiving income at this time, what you want to do is you want to go into this particular line of income. You click on the pencil and move this start date back one day, because we know that they were receiving this income before they came into the project, because they're receiving it at project entry. So we save it, and now this mismatch is going to be fixed. But it's important to remember, and this is a problem we've seen a few times, it's important to remember that the income starts after the start date. It doesn't start on that date, it starts after the date. And that'll fix this particular mismatch problem. And I mean, there are a million different situations where you can have a mismatch, and it actually can be very helpful to go through all of the lines of income, because there could be something that's very old, kind of lurking in the past, like these things back here that might cause issues. You can also use this little magnifying glass to pop it out and get more in one box, or more lines of income in one box, so you don't have to look through everything. But it is very helpful to look back through the past to make sure that there's nothing that somebody left open. Because a lot of times people will create a line of income with a start date, and they'll leave it open, and it'll continue to be active after that date. And I think that's all we have on the mismatches and the missing data. And I think we've got Amanda now with child-only entries.
Great. Thank you, David. Do let us know if you have any questions about any of that. There's only been one question so far, so it sounds like based on that, everyone must be getting what we're showing them. But if not, please do let us know if there's things that you want us to go into more detail on. So we are going to move over to discuss some child-only entries, and we'll see if there's anything else in there that comes up that anyone wants to look at. I'm going to look at this other test client that we have, Bowman test. And for this client, we're trying to look for reasons and solutions to ways that clients show up in our data quality report as being child only. So I'm going to look real quick for a second here at one of the very straightforward reasons that this happens in this report. So if you do see in your child-only entries tab of your report that there is no date of birth entered, that is a very clear fix, that if your client does not have a date of birth in their assessment, that is one way in which clients will show up in this list. And that would just be a trigger for the user to go back and put in that date of birth, which would then inform the system of whether this is truly a client that is meant to be considered an adult, and that would take care of the child-only entry. So I'm not going to go over that one directly, but the one I want to go over is where it's not clear why the client is a child being reflected as a child-only entry. We are aware that there are those programs that do serve children, so some of those clients that show up in there, if they are children and they're meant to be in the program by themselves, we have a way to manage that, and users can just reach out to our team to let us know that that's the case. But if your client is not by themselves, it may very well look like what you see on my screen. We have a client that is attached to a household. So Bowman test is here. He is 1 year old, and he is attached to 2 other clients. So one of the first things we might notice is that Bowman test here is indicated as self, and he is 1 year old. So if I want to fix that, I'm going to go into one of my entries, and I'll first show you how to handle that issue. So we'll just notice the connection here. And actually, I wonder if the date of birth, I'm going to try to fix it here, but you'll see here that there are some of these cases where the date of birth is missing here, so it must be in the other entry that the assessment has a date of birth. We're going to try to override that one. And I'm going to say this client was born in 1981. I'm going to come down here and save this and see if that's going to change at the top of my screen here, how old that client is. It's not yet. I'm going to just check the other one to see if that one happens to have another date of birth in it that's fighting with this, because there are sometimes 2 different entries, and here it is. This is the one that's fighting with the other one. So this can be a good example of some history. I'm going to try to change this, and I know I made it 1981. I'm going to try to make it the same, but I don't remember what I put in the other one, so let's see what happens. And if I come up here, so that still didn't fix it. I'm going to try one other thing to see if it will correct this. I'm going to look at my history this time. I'm going to see when I first answered this question and clicked on this little bar next to the date of birth field that was green, because I want to see what is conflicting here. There are 3 different values, and I have 2 of them that are for the same date and 1 of them that appears to be the one that's creating the issue for me. So if I delete this, because I know that that's incorrect, and I know who entered it, and I know that it was done in error, I can actually use this little trash can to get that out of there, so that now it only reflects the 2 values that are the same. And if I come all the way back down and save and exit again, let's see if that's now the solution that we were looking for. Not yet. Come over, and there it goes. So I just moved over a tab. It is a database. We got to give it a minute to let it process. So now I see that the age is here. If I come back to summary, now the system has taken that change. So that's one example of one that can be a little confusing. There are various examples that you can relate that to, just as an FYI. If you do run into, and we've definitely had a lot of people let us know that there's data in the assessment that appears accurate to them when they look at the assessment by going in here through this pencil. But then when they look at their data quality report, it's not reflecting the same information, which that was an example of how that might happen. And in those cases, we are needing to go to those history bars to confirm whether there's value that's in that history that is conflicting with the value that you're attempting to make the report reflect, that's accurate about the client. And you do have the ability often to get rid of that history if there is something that's erroneous, that was entered in error. If you ever run into a case where there's a value that's not something that you can manage yourself, that's also where you can reach out to our team and we'll help you deal with those types of situations in a one-by-one situation. But those are really particular to that exact client's what data is attached to it, so we definitely need to troubleshoot those as they come up a lot of times. But in terms of child-only entries, let's talk about that now that we have a household that appears where there is an adult and there are 2 children. So we're going to look at how these 2 children could be in the system by themselves and what that looks like. So from here, I wouldn't be able to tell because it looks the same here as it would if all of my clients were attached properly. So this is not the screen that's going to help you figure out if, where the child-only entry issue is coming from. You would actually have to come over to the Entry Exit tab. And from here, what I'm noticing right away is that my client, and I'm going to look at this one for HUD for 11/30/2014, there's only 1 client in this entry. So this little column over here for client count with the number 1 and with the circle around it, this is actually telling me how many clients are connected to the entry that I'm looking at here. If I click on that, it is a link and will show me which client is in this entry. And ideally, if all of my household was together here, I would have all 3 clients listed. Since I don't, the way that I'm going to fix this is I'm going to have to go to each one of the client records that it's sort of a judgment call of how you manage this. Since I'm in the head of households record right now, I would go to each one of those 2 children's records and I would delete the entry so that I can properly connect them to the open entry that I see on the head of households record. And I'm going to show you how this works. So just to explain before I do it how you can avoid this issue, if I open this entry right here with my pencil, the way that this is managed is all by this part right here in terms of whether the clients get connected properly to the entry or not. Right now what I see is that I only have the adult or Bowman test attached to this entry, but it is a male with child. So if this were when I was first creating an entry, I would have the choice of which clients I want to check off the box next to include in the entry. If I don't check off a box, that means that that client is not getting pulled into and being connected to the entry. So what I'm going to do is first go back and delete the 2 child's entries because they will be sitting by themselves right now, and we'll go look at that. The next thing I'm going to do is come back to this record, and I'm going to use this little include additional household members button to pull those children into this entry. However, I'm choosing to make those deletions first because then it will be very clear to me which one is the correct one and which one is the incorrect one. If you were to pull the children in first, then you'd have to figure out which one is the one you want to delete in those kids' records because they will have an extra entry if I pull them in first. So let me show you how that works. I'm just going to come to households and switch to one of my children. And now I'm in his record. I'm going to come over here to entry exit. This is what again, there's a 1 here. If I click on it, it's telling me this child is by themselves in this entry. So my fix is I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to delete it, and I'm going to leave this as empty. I would never come to a child's record on its own and start a new entry unless that child was actually by themselves in the program. So now to keep moving, I'm going to go back to households. I'm going to come to Bobo, and I'm going to go to his entry exit tab, and this again, Bobo is by himself, so I'm going to close that and get rid of this record. There it's gone, and now I want to come back to my head of households record, Bowman test, and I actually want to come back to his entry exit tab, and I'm going to come into the pencil in front of the entry. Now I'm ready to include additional household members. And this is where the system creates another little window that lets me check off these boxes. I can click continue. Now those children are being pulled in properly to this entry. If I click save and continue, now I'll find that I have all 3 household members connected. So this is definitely the most kind of straightforward way to take care of a child-only entry. And then the other thing I wanted to make sure to show you all was how to add a new child to the household. Ideally, I would have filled out all of that assessment data, but since we're just going over some of the issues, I'm not going to take care of that right now, but I could come back and do it later if I ever needed to. But if I want to say, give an example for this household having another child brought into it, I will come over here to households. Since I already have a household in existence, I can start from my households tab for the head of households record to pull in another child. And so if I want to do this, I don't need to start a new household. What I actually want to do is manage this household. So if I manage this, I click on Manage Household. I do see that all of the information here for the existing household members. And if I want to add an additional person, I have a button here that allows me to do so. So if I click Add / Delete Household Member, I now have this little space here that allows me to add clients to this household, but you really do have to pay attention to all of your options, because if I don't click on this little arrow to the left, it's not going to give me all the options I need to actually satisfy my objective here. So I'm going to click on this, and that then allows me to see this client search area. And so this really is just that. It is a client search function, and I'm going to use this to look for the child who, in this case, I'm going to add a child that was born in the last week. We'll say it's a brand new child to the family. And if I want to do that, it means that the child is not likely in our database, but our database doesn't allow you to add a new client without first searching the system. So I do have to use this to look for that child first before I can create them. And so let's say this is Ginny test, and I would first search, and when I say Ginny, that might not be the best example, but if I were to say if this is a Jennifer, and I want to do Jennifer test, I would suggest that you look for various ways just in terms of how the search function works. Just be careful with it, that you're not looking for someone who already exists and creating a new client. But since we said we're creating a baby, I am going to assume that this client's not in the system and not worry about a lot of these search results because they're not reflecting the client that I'm looking for. Since I have searched, I can now come back up and answer some of these questions about the client and put in this case, I'm just putting in some fake data just to give you an example. And so now I have the ability to add this client, and it is going to give me this message to make sure I know that I'm adding a client, and I'll say OK. And once I've done this, the system is pulling the client into my selected clients at the bottom, which is exactly what I want to happen. And there's nothing else on this screen that I need to do at this point, so I'm going to say continue. Once I've done that, the system brings me right back to the screen I just left. We were right here. We were adding it basically in the same screen to add a new client, and now that's been accomplished because now here, Jen Test. She's right there. She's got her own ID number, and I get to answer this question about the relationship. I'm going to leave this head of household as a no, say that this is a child, but I want to make this joined household date the actual day that this child was born. So I can make it the 25th of 2016, if that was her birth date, and then I can say save and exit. So that's step number 1. I've now brought this child into the household. Step number 2 is going to be coming to this entry exit and actually going to the one I started from 11/30/2014. I'm going to do this very much the same way that you just saw me correct the child-only entries, but what I'm going to tell you before I do it is that I need to go through this step in order to pull that new child into the entry record, but afterwards is when I'll be able to adjust the entry date for this child. The system will not, it won't properly calculate if you pull in a child on 11/30/2014 when they were born on January 25th, 2016. That's not going to work properly with the system to have the client with an entry date before they were born. So we definitely want to make sure that the entry date reflects when the child actually did join the household as part of the program. So if I include additional household members at this point, I do have that box there that I'll check off for the new child and say continue. Now that child is reflected in my data here, and I can save and continue. And from this screen, this actually is a point where I should be able, if clicking on this pencil, and say no, to actually change the date just for this child. The most important thing at this step is that I uncheck the boxes for all of the other household members to ensure that I only change the entry date for Gen test, the new baby. So I uncheck all of these boxes, and now I want to tell the system that this child only entered the project as of the 25th of 2016. And I can save and continue, and now you can see that the other 3 household members have that date of 11/30/2014 as their entry, and that new child is only in the program as of their date of birth. And that is exactly the steps that we wanted to make sure that you were able to see demonstrated for those fixes for child-only entries. Seems like there are a couple questions coming in. Let's see what the one is about this situation. So for the entry to be correct for Ms. Peck, for Sharonda, did that just satisfy that question? Because it seems like you were asking about adding a child, but then perhaps it was that second step of actually coming into the entry, and we'll move forward a little bit here, and actually coming into the pencil within the entry itself, and then unchecking the boxes for the additional household members to actually make this work properly for you and reflect the true information about that family. So I have a feeling for Sharonda that that answered her question. But at this point, I think we do want to hear from everyone that's on the webinar and hear what you need us to now show you in terms of other issues that you've encountered with your data quality. So truly that's everything that we thought was just a good place to start, and now we need your input on what else you would want us to look at in these entries, or if it's entry, exit, interim, any point in the process of entering data that you're encountering data quality issues is what we want to hear about. Put those in through a question, and we will definitely show you some examples and help demonstrate how to make those corrections. So I'll give you a few seconds here to type if anyone is typing. And David, if there's anything you want to add, feel free to.
I think we covered a lot of the ones that people entered into the form when they signed up. But cool. I'm definitely interested to hear some other questions that people have.
We've got one. So Steve from La Casa Norte would like to know how we handle it when a child leaves a household. So we can certainly use the same example here that I'm working on. So if I have one person, we'll just say child, adult, whoever it is that leaves a household, it should be handled the same way. And if you're, we'll handle this in 2 parts. We'll start by handling the exit from the program, and then we can look at how to actually properly take them, actually show that they've left the household altogether if you want to make sure that they're taken out of the entry as well as the household itself. So to start, if I want to exit one person, say that one of my children does leave, what I'm going to do is actually go to one of those children's records to start. If I want to reflect that Bobo test has left, I'm going to come to his record directly and go to the entry exit. By the way, I now have that client count over here. That's my confirmation. This is the best confirmation you have around child-only entries that you've corrected something, is when you get to the point where this number reflects the total number of people that are actually being served by the program. That's the way it works. And if you click on it, it should then show each one of those household members. So that's exactly what you want here. But if I start with the exit, and I want to tell the system that Bobo has left the program, it is very much these checkboxes that would control whether I'm exiting anyone else. So if I want to only exit him, I would make this date reflect when Bobo left the program, choose my reason for leaving, as well as the destination, and maybe he's able to move out on his own now. So I can say save and continue. I would complete my exit assessment. And notice at the top of the screen here that I'm only exiting one client. All other clients are staying remaining in the program. But if I answer all of my questions, if anything has changed for this client in their assessment, which again, I'm not going to do now, but in real practice, I would answer these. And then I would save and exit. This is just my caution question. I'll say no. So now I can see that that client has exited, but if I come back to the adult, just to confirm for you, they are very much still in the program with no exit. So now if I also want to make sure that in the future that it's clear for myself and for my other team members that this client is not coming back to the households to my knowledge, I can come over here to households and I can come back to this manage household. And I can actually tell the system that I want to remove someone. To remove someone, I would, and honestly, doing this is not something that we do very often. We never want to delete household members. That's one thing that I want to point out here. Is the way you don't want to do this is by clicking on this button. We never delete. Deleting can create much more issues for us. So instead, we do have this. This is a very clear symbol that allows you to see that it's a removing, it's a circle, it's red, minus, and if you hover on it, it tells you that they're leaving the household. So if this is the client that's leaving, I click on that little circle, and this is the screen that pops open to let me tell the system the date as of which this client has left. Once I say save, now I can see that I have a household of just those 3 members that are currently in the program and that I want to remain together. If I were to use this little expand triangle over here, I would also see that Bobo has now moved down to the previous household members, and I can see that date that he joined and then left the program, and that's exactly the way that this should work. Again, we would never delete household members because we can't really, we can add them back, but it can definitely create more problems if we delete household members. The only other thing I'll say about that is that we all share households in this system, so that's one of the main reasons that we don't delete, is that we don't want to have a negative impact on anyone else's data. So we always remove. Okay, so that is adding and removing, or removing more so. And let's see what else we have in here. Okay, let's see. So did you say Carrie? Oh, Aaron, Mr. Nichols. So how do I update an expired release of information? Oh, okay. That's a handy one since it says expired here, doesn't it? So it does appear that this is a link. Let's see what happens. When you click on it, it actually does bring about just a blank release of information for you to enter. So that's just curiosity on my part of what happens when you click on it. Haven't done that before. But if I come to the ROI tab, I can see here that the release of information for this client was active for just 1 day. So if it has expired, it's really because of this end date. That is what drives whether this reflects that the release of information is expired. So if I did want to add a new release of information, I can add a new record. If I wanted to, if for some reason this was done in error, I can come in here and I can actually, if I choose to, I can actually take out the end date if that's, oh, of course it is required. So honestly, the way that you would handle this is you would move the end date further in the future. Our goal as a system is to get this end date to be an optional field, but since it is required, we do suggest that people use that 10/16/2018 as their end date so that it does give them 3 years before they would have to renew their releases of information. By doing that, that gives me more time here so that I can say that this is going to be expiring in 2018 up here as well. So that would be the only ways you have to manage it, is you either change the end date or you leave it as this one as closed and you create a new release of information. So that's for you, Aaron. Let's see what another question. Okay, so changing income is something that I'm seeing here. If my client has an for you, David Dempsey, that if your client has an update to their income, but it's before their annual assessment is due, so we're talking about clients that are staying enrolled for more than a year, because that's after 365 days in the program is when the clients are expected to have an annual assessment put in the system. That time frame of putting in an annual assessment is 30 days before or after their anniversary date. So if we haven't reached that point yet and my client has a change in income, how do I put that in the system is one of the questions. So we can show you how to do that. And you are correct, David. It would go in as an interim assessment or an interim review. And I'll show you how that works, and I'll just read your second question before I do that. So this is an interesting question, David. He wants to know if you miss an annual assessment, if you miss the window. So my client's been enrolled for a year, but it's more than 30 days after their anniversary date. What do you do? If you really have missed it and you don't have information about the client, there isn't necessarily a lot you can do to go back. So we haven't necessarily started to see that as a hard rule in the system where your data isn't going to pull into APRs. But that's the future that I'm anticipating, is that there will come a time somewhere down the line that our system will actually create a hard stop, that if you don't have an annual assessment, it will create challenges for us in the future. Right now, that's not where we are, and our system isn't penalizing us for not putting in the annual assessment in the right time frame, but now is the time for us to be working towards being able to manage that because we don't know what our options are entirely, because we haven't gotten there yet to the point where it's not possible to go back and put the data in late. So we're definitely going to have to see how that goes in the future. For now, you should be working towards being able to catch those clients in that window and get those annual assessments in the system within that 30 days before or after their anniversary date. But to answer your first question of how you would reflect a change in income, let me first go in to this client's entry to make sure that we have some income to start from. So I'm going to go into their entry record, and we're just going to use this as an example for the case that you're looking to kind of see here. So if I say yes, that at entry this client had income, and if I want to show that they had $500 of income, and this was earned income, and they were receiving this source of income, there's a start date, no end date. I say save. I want to make sure it says 500 here in my total monthly income, and I want to do my HUD verification. I know that this client is only receiving earned income, so I would say no to everything else and save and exit. Now I have this set up properly, so I can save and exit just for the sake of our example. Oops, I don't want to answer those questions now. This is one of the hardest ones. You have to read this question. Would you like to answer these questions now? And no, I would not. Okay, so since I know that my income is ready, is there for this 11/30/2014 entry, we're just going to say that this is the one that we're going to show the example of for an update. If it has not yet been a year since this client's anniversary, I would be able to come to the interim. Even though there's an annual in here, I'm just going to show you the example of the update. And I'm going to leave this as it is for the moment, but I'm going to put in the update. I'm going to put in the date that I want to reflect the change. So if it was 12/1/2014, since they entered not too far before then, and I'll make it 12/15 so it's even more realistic. And save and continue. Now I'm in my, actually it's in the annual assessment right here. So this is one of the things we want to check is am I on the right assessment. I want to make sure I'm on the update. And let me see, where is my update assessment? And there it is. Okay, so this is the one that you would actually be seeing if you came in to do an update. And here we go. So it shows my $500. If I look through here, that yes is going to be all the way at the end that shows that $500. So I'm going to tell the system now in this update that this client's income has actually increased. And since I'm putting this in the system on 12/15/2014, I would want to use that date to inform how I manage the end dates and the start dates. But the real goal here is to tell the system that this income right here is over, and this income is over as a note. So I need to change both of these pieces of information now to reflect the new amount of the income. But to do that, I actually have to start by coming into this existing record and telling the system when this ended. So I want to make sure I stagger my dates when I do this, meaning if this started 11/30/2014 and I'm doing my update 12/15/2014, something has changed since then that triggered me to put in this update, and that new income is already effective for the client. So I'm probably going to use yesterday's date to tell the system when the client actually started receiving a new amount, but I want to use a date before then to tell the system that this $500 ended. So I'm going to tell the system that the $500 has an end date of 12/13/2014, just to make sure all my dates are staggered. Once I say save, now I can tell the system that there's a new amount, and I'll tell the system that now this client has $800 of earned income. And I actually want this to start on 12/14/2014 because they started receiving this perhaps yesterday. They got that job. So now I just want to make sure that this is updated as well. And I can look at my complete visual here of all of the sources of income. And I can see, oh, and I did miss one thing here. I was able to catch that I missed this yes. So I can fix that too by coming in here, making sure that's yes, because otherwise my reports won't work properly. Say save. Now I can see that this client had $500. It ended on this date. Then $800 started on this date. And so that would be the correct way to do an update before an annual assessment for income. I can also make sure my HUD verification is done. It does appear that everything is good in my HUD verification. I've got my green check mark, so now I should be good. And I can save and exit. Okay, let us know if you have any follow-up questions about that, David. I'm just looking for more questions here. And there actually don't appear to be too many questions. Great, I'm glad that worked, David. And for Kathleen, I see your question just came in. No, I am glad you asked that, Kathleen. So Kathleen has a question about, and actually I'm going to come into the update and show you in here. So Kathleen's question is whether when you are coming in to actually change a sub-assessment, if I should have, and I'll come into this, you can see it. The question is, should this now be a no? So I told the system that there's an end date for this source of this amount of income and this source of $500, and logically, the thought is that this would then be no, that they're not receiving this income. But for the time frame of 11/30/2014 to 12/13/2014, this was true. The client was receiving this. So I have to leave this as a yes for that time frame. And then this would be a yes for this time frame, whenever this would end. So honestly, you would not touch that, which is helpful. You don't have to touch that field at all. You would only touch the end date and then go to add your new record if there is one to add. So thank you for asking that, Kathleen. And for Steve, we are recording this webinar, so we can post it. I think I cut off just a little bit of the beginning of it, so hopefully that won't be too confusing as a recording. But we will go ahead and post this so that people can rewatch it, or if you want to have your users rewatch it, which is perhaps what you're thinking, Steve. So we will do that. And you're welcome, Gladys. All right, we're looking for our next case or question that someone might want us to demonstrate. There's still quite a few of you that are on the webinar, so I know that there must be a few other questions out there. Okay. I'll give you guys another minute here to give us some questions you might want us to go through, or scenarios even, of something with data quality that you want to see how to handle. So I'm going to do a little recap perhaps. So what we have gone over is generally the report itself. We've looked at how to interpret the Chicago Data Quality Report, the child-only entries. We talked about each one of these tabs to understand how you're looking at this information to make it useful for finding errors in the actual client records. So if you have any questions about this, let us know now, because we can definitely go back to the report. Beyond that, we've gone into those missing fields of how to handle these null values. We've had a few people ask questions about these null values that are not read, which for those that might have missed that the first time, we did say that those are not read because they are not being counted as missing for that client. We also looked at those mismatches, so if there's anything else with the mismatches that would be a case that you'd like us to go over, we can do that. And the HUD verifications, they seem to be straightforward, but really with HUD verifications, what you're aiming for is green check marks. If you have those red exclamation points, that's what's driving the HUD verification on this report as being red. Yeah, that's just a general recap of what we've gone over. So let us know what else you want us to look at. And perhaps there is nothing at this time, but you know how to reach us. I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint presentation so you can see our contact information. And so here is the way to get in touch with me and the HMIS. If you shoot an email to HMIS at allchicago.org, that is, or go to the help desk at hmis.thechicagoalliance.org. Those are ways to put in help desk tickets. David Melnick, his email is dmelnick@allchicago.org if anyone is trying to reach him. But we generally all handle the help desk, so going that route will definitely get you to both David and I. And I think since we are recording this webinar, don't want to hang out for too long, but I don't see any other questions coming in. So I guess at this point, you're welcome, Jack. I'm glad to hear that this was a good webinar. I hope others of you feel the same way. But I do think it's a good time for us to probably adjourn. Thank you all very much for attending. If you have questions that arise, do email us and let us know how we can help you. Again, that deadline, I'm just going to pull that up real quick so you see that timeline one more time here. That next deadline is February 8th, Monday, February 8th. So that's when we're expecting anyone that didn't have rates under 5% or no child-only entries that were erroneous. If you still have things to clean, that's when your next deadline is set.
And just one quick note on that is that you actually, if you, and I know I emphasized this earlier, any updates made to the data on Monday, February 8th will not actually show up in the reports until Tuesday, February 9th. So any updates that happen to the data need to happen before that. So most likely on Friday, or if there's anything last minute, it can happen on Sunday. But they won't update unless they're inputted on the day before the day that the report is due.
Great. Great. Thank you, David. Was there anything else that you saw in any of the questions that you want to mention, or are we good?
Nope. I'm glad people took something from this. And again, if there are any other questions, please submit it to the help desk, and we'll get to them as soon as we can.
Great. Thank you all again for joining us. We're going to end the webinar now. Have a good rest of your day.